My name is Alan Brown. I have asked one of my son-in-laws, John Farr, if he would support me in review of my business and professional career from the very beginning to the very end. I think of that career as being very important for me to review and for me to share. And further, in the hope of some of the lessons could be received in such a way that better understanding of a father, a husband, community member, church worker, in a way better understanding of a life that was very dedicated, very committed to the work that I did. It's February, or it's November 21st, 2019. And I'm going to begin as it relates to my business career, first as a student at the University of Utah. I entered the University of Utah very young, emotionally, intellectually, had a great deal of growing up to do, which I would say I did do. I entered as certainly an adolescent, hardly could be termed a young a man in any sense of the word, but by virtue of fraternity life, challenges of college courses, and having a father that insisted that I be an officer, which encouraged me to be a part of the Reserve Officer Training Corps at the University of Utah, all translated into a young man rather than an adolescent kid during that 4-year period of time. Immediately after graduation, I had the obligation to serve on active duty with the United States Air Force. My motivation then, as had been my motivation ever since I could remember, was to be a part of flight and flying as a pilot. That was truly my aim. That was what I wanted to be then and when I grew up. And the examinations required, both physical and mental, all supported that mission statement, if you will. While awaiting flight orders, I was stationed at Williams Air Force Base in Arizona. A really important, exciting time, participating with instructors, and that was a secondary school for flight training, where after primary training, students would then go to a secondary school to be introduced to jet airplanes. That's where I spent time waiting. It was also the time that, remarkably, while awaiting flight training, I made the decision not to go into pilot training. Circumstances, perspective, prayer, meaningful association brought about a decision which I have shared in another context and prior to this, caused me to completely change the course of action that I had had since I had been little, and decided instead that if indeed I was to do something beyond the military, it was also a time as I spent time as I awaited flight orders for me to gain a feeling and a perspective and an enthusiasm and an appreciation for the church. It had never been a part of my orientation or a priority to consider a mission. And while awaiting flight orders for reasons all of which I can't even fully identify, a mission became extremely important. Important enough for me to turn down flight orders to Waco, Texas, and to fulfill my military career in administrative capacities. I had established a good relationship with executive officers during that period of time. They had gained respect for me. They felt that I deserved to have any and every opportunity they could provide as I finished out my military commitment, and gave me the chance to go to be stationed in France, Châteauroux, France. I had the good sense and I had the maturity at that stage to recognize this was a privilege. This was a real opportunity. And I was going to do anything and everything to take advantage of where I was and what I did. While in that assignment, my orientation and my motivation was to learn anything and everything I could about where I was, its history, its culture. I soon bought a motorcycle to cover as much area as I possibly could. I literally traveled all over Western Europe during any time off that I had. I studied classical music. I studied anything of a historic culture, religion. My life was simply one of complete excitement and dedication to the world in which we live. Additionally, I was very physically active. As a teenager, basketball meant a great deal. My Ed Chill Ward program gave me confidence, gave me the opportunity to develop skills good enough that I was even able to try out for and actually be asked to be a part of the basketball program for the Central Air Materiel Command. Started the game, and then the Air Force became aware of my participation and promptly reminded me and my commanding officer that they were not paying officers to play basketball, but simply a indication of how focused and directed I was at that period of time. I was discharged from the military, and 24 years old. The mission had been a reason that I had not taken advantage of the opportunity of going into pilot training, but it was difficult to actually make that decision. I came back and enrolled at the University of Utah again with the confidence that I really had academic ability. And for that year, or for that period of time, I enrolled in simply courses that I felt would challenge my brain: chemistry, physics, life sciences, math. In the meantime, I'm emotionally and spiritually recognizing that I made a very important decision to not fly so that I could, in actual fact, serve a mission. A caring and dedicated bishop made every effort to remind me of that decision, which I had shared with him, and with some degree of reluctance, but absolute commitment, decided at the end of my year after the Air Force to accept a call to the British Isles as a missionary. I'm now 25 years old, and I was as mature, as adult as anyone could be. I knew that I was older. Many missionaries then were older because of active duty commitments. It was during and at the end of the Korean War. But the decision to go on a mission had been not easy. And this is not a conversation that I'll have about my mission, only to say that from the time I left until the time I returned, I have almost no regrets. I would say no regrets, but obviously somewhere during that period of time, I'm sure there were moments of lapse. But Alan Brown, Elder Alan Brown, was absolutely absorbed in why I was there, what I was there to do, and the responsibilities I had as a representative of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. During that period of time, I was corresponding with friends, one in particular, Brent Eager, who had been a lifelong friend, who had been taking similar courses of action as I had, not in the same sequence, military, mission, and then had pursued graduate school. In contrast to me, Brent had always been a serious student. He was an engineer in the engineering school at the university, a very serious student, a golfer playing for the university golfer team, actually far more mature than I was growing up. But at this stage, a similar age, and he had decided to go to the University of Michigan to graduate school and encouraged me to follow the same kind of course of action. I did exactly as he recommended. During other conversations and during other time frames, I've reviewed and will review again the challenge I had of getting into the graduate program, the University of Michigan, because what I was at that point was a good student. What I hadn't been in the past was a scholar in any sense of the word, and being a good student had only come at the latter part of my University of Utah efforts, certainly not at the beginning. In any case, for reasons and assistance that I can't begin to identify, I was able to attend the University of Michigan. Michigan gave a great deal of latitude in terms of their Master's in Business Administration. And during the period of time that I had been released from active duty and decided to go on a mission, I met, through another close and wonderful friend, Bill Paul, a man by the name of Hugh Pinnock. Hugh was, I believe, the student body president of the University of Utah, or had been. Bill had been a part of the student body leadership. Felt very strongly that we should become acquainted with each other. Hugh had decided that he was going to go into the life insurance business. Hugh was he was a very good student, very committed, very responsible, had always been mature. I was impressed with Hugh. He felt to encourage me to pursue the same career path that he had decided upon, which at first did not resonate in any way. What I was impressed with was that Hugh was an outstanding individual and that Hugh had decided to take that course of action. And what he did was he planted a seed. I found that in going to graduate school, the program included a great deal of flexibility. There were courses that were required, that were very, very competitive, very challenging, but there was a great deal of latitude. And I took advantage of that latitude. I did not do one other thing during the year and a half that I spent in Ann Arbor other than study and be active in the church. I was a stake missionary at the time, but I didn't do one other thing other than study and sign up for classes in astronomy, in meteorology, in Lutheranism, and they had an actuarial school at Michigan and had they had a professor that had been involved in the insurance industry and had become a leader and then a teacher, and so took classes, academic classes concerning the insurance world and became very enamored with its opportunities. I also, at the same time, was deeply involved in other financial options in the business world. I'd established myself with banking leaders there. I'd established myself with brokerage dealers. The feeling of my potential in the life insurance industry became undeniable. The relationship that I had with Hugh Pinnock, who really was just beginning his career and had begun in being a part of the Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company, exposed me to that company, and through the University of Michigan, I became aware that from an academic standpoint, that company had distinguished itself as simply number one in anything and everything that it did. So without any more detail, the University of Michigan referencing Hugh, remembering his friendship, confidence. I graduated from the University of Michigan, actually with the opportunity of continuing on academically, but decided to enter the life insurance business with the Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company. Inconsistent with who I thought I was, and inconsistent with who anybody who knew me thought I was. Stop. Becoming an agent with Northwestern Mutual was truly, in some ways, like jumping off a cliff and hoping there was water below to save you. The compensation was, if you sell, you get paid. If you don't sell, you don't get paid. There was absolutely no security that came with the decision. I had had the opportunity to go to work with IBM. I'd had the opportunity to go to work with the Ford Motor Company. I had had the opportunity to go to work with a big bank in Detroit. All of these had come not only through my efforts in graduate school, but I'd become acquainted with the Romney family. George Romney was then the stake president of the area. His wife, Lenore, had a member of their family that was attending, I think a son-in-law that was attending the University of Michigan Law School, and she came frequently to the Ann Arbor ward. And she believed that Alan Brown could do most anything. And through her influence and the influence of President Romney, and then the school, the University of Michigan, somehow or other, there were opportunities that in ways were extremely fulfilling, but a complication, because in the back of my mind I had this interest, this motivation to sell life insurance. One of my final interviews with IBM in an airplane. And informal conversation, I said, why are you interested in me? And the executive said, because we think, we don't know, but we think you can be better than we are. And that's who we're interested in hiring. And then I said, if I decide not to become a part of IBM, would I ever have the opportunity again? And he said no. He said, no, this is something that we would be interested in on only a one-time basis. And I remember feeling the sense of obscurity and insecurity, and yet that conversation solidified the fact that I was going to try the life insurance business, that I was going to see if I could, on my own, build a career that had absolutely no base nor any kind of built-in security system, that if I made it, it would be purely and simply because of what I did and how efficient I was. So in the spring of 1960, I came back and joined hands with Hugh Pinnock and one or two other associates to begin my life insurance career. I married Gay soon after, in June of 1960, and I don't think she had any way of knowing or anticipating how serious a man she had decided to join hands with. I worked as many hours as I had the energy to work. I tried to be a good partner, to be a supportive partner, to be a fun partner. But there was no question that I felt that anything that I could do to be the best I could be was worth the price. Calling on the phone incessantly, meeting people in anticipation of being their advisor. It was work that I knew I had to do. It was work that I didn't enjoy, but what I was motivated by, not what I had to do, but what I could become by virtue of doing what I had to do. And I really believed in my future. I really believed in the potential and the possibilities of what it would mean to be good in that particular segment of the business world. My schedule was one of personal demand. I had the perception and the identity that I was both boss and worker, that it was my responsibility to define what kind of boss I wanted to be and how I would respond as the worker to that boss. The boss that I wanted to be was one who demanded effort, determination, focus, unrelenting in requiring anything and everything that a good worker was. As a worker, I wanted to do anything and everything consistent with what the boss was requiring me to do. A rather silly, maybe a crazy relationship, but I wore both hats. And as a boss, I was tough. And as a worker, I responded. Hugh and I worked together in many ways. Each week, he and I would go to Utah County dealing with what is called orphan policyholders. And each of us would take a pile of orphan policyholders, call, indicate that we'd like to review. And that proved to be a building block in many who ended up being my client. My personal efforts had to do with calling on the phone and introducing myself as someone who would like to leave with them information that could and would be very important to them as they considered the purchase of life insurance. Those that I called were primarily from, I think it's the Utonian, the yearbook of the University of Utah. And I would introduce myself as we attended the University of Utah together, and then would outline that I wanted to leave with them information that could be helpful in their planning, and then when and if they considered the purchase of insurance, maybe they could think of me in that consideration. The first year was, from a measurable standpoint, a failure. I sold very few individuals, had little success from the standpoint of people purchasing life insurance. The second year, I gained respect and started to, in actual fact, make sales. And each of those sales were positive and more often than not included meaningful referrals. The third year, I was being recognized. I had established a reputation in the community. Business articles were referencing me. I had production that was already noteworthy. The fourth year, I think, is when I qualified for the $1 Million Roundtable. There were almost no agents who qualified for that industry recognition, just a handful. And at that point in time, I think there was only one person in the state of Utah that exceeded my production, a New York Life agent by the name of Reed Brinton. It was that year that I also qualified with the Northwestern Mutual to have led production in the western segment of the company. The country was divided, I think, in 3 areas then: East, Central, and West. And I was recognized as #1 in the West. The 5th year, I qualified for in the company. The top 20 was #8 in Northwestern Mutual. The effort, the way I had approached it was in terms of the way I'd approached it had really proved to translate into someone that I could be very proud of and that the industry could be very proud of. It was at that period of time, the Northwestern Mutual had been interested in me actually conducting seminars in terms of what I attributed the progress that I had made to. I was invited to Chicago to meet with the company psychologist to penetrate who I was, where I was coming from, why I had achieved what I had achieved. That interview with the psychologist in Chicago translated into the company not putting me into the marketplace to give seminars, but to become the general agent of the Utah agency. My general agent at the time, who I had worked with, had offended the community. He was very bright, very forthright, very intimidating, and had alienated himself with the industry and with the community to such an extent that the Northwestern Mutual felt like a change had to be made. Hugh Pinnock had been more than qualified and anxious to have assumed that role, but did not have faith that the company would do what they did, and that was ask for the general agent to resign and appoint a new general agent. I had no management desires or interests. It had not been a part of my objectives. I was anxious to be in the marketplace. I was anxious to be independent. I was confident then in my independence. So I accepted that offer more by default than design. The agency was still small. Most of its productivity was my productivity. I don't have memory of what percentage, but probably 75%, at least, maybe 80 of the percentage of the production was my production. So the 6th year, I changed hats or wore 2 hats. I continued to be very personally and active as an agent and to produce significant amounts of insurance relative to that time frame. And in addition, went about trying to build a structuring and an organization that had merit in our community. After Pebble Beach, I completed that year. Pebble Beach was held in the fall and was contiguous or in harmony with the company's Western meeting. They each year would hold regional meetings, and they had chosen during that period of time for the Western meeting to be in the fall in San Francisco. So after my Pebble Beach experience, I attended the meetings, which were always very motivating, uplifting, and encouraging to me. I really related to and loved the business meetings of the Northwestern Mutual, both their regional meeting in San Francisco and their annual meeting in Milwaukee. Each year I had attended those meetings, beginning with my first year in 1960. Hugh Pinnock, Darrell Nielsen, and I climbed in, I forget what car it was, but it was not a comfortable car. None of us could afford to stay anywhere, so we traveled to Milwaukee, and I really don't know where we stayed. It had to be in a very basic environment. Drove back from Milwaukee, and then made it a goal to go to the annual meeting, which always is in July, for as long as I was associated with the company. So I completed the year 1962 and began 63. Still 24/7 worker. This was hard on Gay. I think that individuals who go to the extreme, we would have to say, whatever the profession, across the board, there's a real price to be paid when it isn't so much winning is the goal, it's achieving and becoming is the goal. And what happens when achieving and becoming is the goal, then you're really doing it for your family. But in the meantime, your family, in this case Gay, and now a new baby, because in 1962, my first little girl was born, Angeline, and I feel a tremendous responsibility to them and have in my mind fulfilling that responsibility means that I just work my head off and my insides out to do anything and everything I could to achieve and to be a good breadwinner. I promised Gay with the first week we were married that I would do everything I could to make sure that she would never have to work. I had no objection to her working, but I would give her the option and that she'd never have to worry about money we would, as a couple, have whatever other worries and challenges that marriage and living included. But I promised her that I would do everything that was within my personal power to do to make money not one of our problems. Whether or not that was fulfilled, I don't know, but I was certainly determined to fulfill it, and would say in balance that that did prove to be true insofar as our married life is concerned. In 1963, I have to say I'm now on fire. My rocket ship is truly ignited. Relationships with very outstanding individuals turned into clients. And my performance was good enough to be a leader in the industry. One of the recognitions for the life insurance industry then, maybe even now, probably now it's too obscure, was $1 Million Roundtable. So if you sold $1 million of insurance, there was industry recognition. And there were only a few, less than 5, I think, in the state of Utah. And about that time was when I sold enough that I was recognized as a member of the $1 Million Roundtable. And then I think the next year, relative to industry, there was only one man in the state, Reed Brenton with New York Life, who sold more. And I, in the meantime, with Northwestern Mutual, led the Western region. So effort and focus and commitment, and it was all translating into to good fortune. Hugh, my wonderful friend, was concerned in his quest for management that he was locked in as it related to the Northwestern Mutual because he felt like Sherman Young would retain the agency responsibilities, and he was recruited by Connecticut Life and became the general agent for Connecticut Life. That was a very, very hard time for me. I was close. I appreciated his friendship. And, of course, he wanted me to leave with him, but I had a strong commitment to the Northwestern Mutual. Other strong things, Daryl Nelson, who is the third member I've referenced, very outstanding. He had become involved with a New York Life agent, Joan Newey, and they recognized that good planning should be one that represented all kinds of investment options, to not be limited to insurance, but could include the stock market and ancillary mutual funds, even real estate. At that time, the industry used to preclude being licensed in different industries, but they had moved on from that. But the Northwestern Mutual had not moved on. At that time, you either had to be in the insurance business with them, solely, could not have any kind of license to sell anything else. And so Daryl decided to move on so that he would have more diversity in his selling, and really ended up with me being in the Northwestern Mutual with some other individuals, none of which were very dedicated, very focused, and were simply there, as every organization will have some individuals who choose to be there, but for whatever reason, they're not going to pay the price that needs to be paid to distinguish yourself in terms of sales or achievement. So the 1963 and 4, and I think then the year 1965, then I was recognized as a leader in the company in the top 10 of the Northwestern Mutual, which was a real recognition and achievement within the industry. Leading the Northwestern Mutual in any way meant that, as it related to industry production, that it was among the highest, that I was among the highest producers in the nation. So my career at that point with the Northwestern Mutual and in the life insurance industry had proved to be very, very rewarding. I certainly had paid the price in terms of time, effort, anything and everything that it required, but by the time we ended 1965, we had 2 little girls, Angelin and Tiffany, and as a family had purchased a home, and our life was a very good and rewarding one. So from 1966 until 1978, I wore a number of hats. Our family had come into the world, our 5 children. I continued to be a high-level personal producer. I worked hard to build an organization, an agency, and wore that general agent's hat. I was very actively involved in the community. I had served on numerous committees, school board, ballet, just anxious to make a contribution to where I lived. The church had always been significant in terms of whatever they ask. I say me to do. It is important that Gay, though really having struggled, remarkably had struggled with my schedule, nevertheless, as a mother and supporter of church callings, community callings, she was a shining light. I could honestly say that I was almost never at home, but those years were tremendously defined, focused, and filled with some with meaningful recognition. In 1978, I was called in by the church to consider the possibility of a mission. I not only was actively involved in community affairs, but from a financial standpoint, had considered avenues of opportunity. I'd made a very significant decision to actually purchase a building to house the agency. At first, it was a partnership between Ellis Ivory and me. We purchased the building together. It was an old bank building, Tracy Collins Bank, I think, and a beautiful building right on Main Street, but required a tremendous investment in accommodating the purposes that we had for an agency. The amount of money that I put into that building, I have no way of recollecting, actually, but it was significant. And during the interim, Ellis decided that he no longer wanted to have an organization. He wanted to simplify his real estate efforts into a loan office. So we agreed that I would assume full responsibility for the building that we had purchased together. Leaving for a mission at that juncture was very inappropriate. President Marion Romney was the first president counselor who was talking to him, and I told him that I would be willing to serve, but I would leave. I would leave lots of debris in the process by virtue of involvements that I had. It was decided to put me on a holding pattern with ongoing interviews in terms of what my circumstances were. So a year passed, 79, constant contact with the missionary department, and sensitivity to the pieces that I was trying to put together. 1980 came. I felt I felt wrong in what I had been doing. I didn't have any illusion that the church needed me or that I had any special qualities that would make that much difference. But the very fact that they wanted me to serve and continually they were at my side, anxious to know what my situation was, and if it seemed appropriate for me to leave with our family. In the spring of 1980, my conversations with the Northwestern Mutual were not supportive. They felt like leaving the agency was irresponsible. The president of the company we had a personal relationship. I had been asked to be on a 3-man committee with the company where there was someone representing the special agents on that committee and someone representing the district agents, and me, who represented the general agents. So therefore, I'd had intimate and ongoing meetings with the president of Northwestern Mutual. His name is Ferguson. And when it became a question of my leaving for religious purposes, it was irresponsible in his mind that I would leave for any reason, let alone for my church. I felt there was every reason in the world to put the general agency on a holding pattern, but certainly that point of view carried no weight. So the president, through the agency head, made it very clear that if I did indeed leave, they would not permit the agency to continue in the quarters that I had purchased. Always, when there was a transition between general agents, there was a time frame where the agency was located would continue to be where the agency was located. So a part of the threat, if you will, or of the promise was, if I made that decision, they would immediately have the new general agent establish quarters someplace other than in the building that I had purchased for and in behalf of the agency. That would mean that in leaving, I would have no occupancy. And I had created a very heavy mortgage, a loan on the building. The loaning institution was the Beneficial Life. The president of Beneficial Life had been a bishop of mine when I was younger, later a stake president. And I called him to tell him of my dilemma, to see if they would consider transferring my mortgage to another party if in actual fact I left for a mission. Interest rates were high then. The loan that I had was at a far more favorable rate. It was essential that the buyer, to the extent I could find one, be able to partner with that same interest rate. At the time, I was taking pictures of interviews that I had, and I took a picture of he and I in the Beneficial Life building, him assuring me that, Alan, we're proud of you, we will support you, and there is no question that if you find a purchaser that will transfer the mortgage to that new party. That was comforting to the extent that if I did in actual fact leave an empty building, that I did have the leverage of a good interest. For the purchaser, in making the decision, it was out of exasperation. In April of 1980, the head of the missionary department then was Vaughn Featherstone. I called Vaughn, and I told him I had to talk to him. He told me he was busy at that time, and I told him no, I had to talk to him. And I ran up Main Street to the church headquarters, and I told him that I wanted to serve as a mission president. He said, Alan, it's April. Mission presidents have been assigned and called. How do you feel about not going? I said, I'm not here because I want to go. I'm here to tell you I'm available to go. And whatever the circumstances are, then that's all I have to say. He told me that if I did not hear within a very few days, then the brethren will have decided to wait before a call was extended. That happened to be a Friday. On Monday, I received a call from President Romney, who said, Brother Brown, have your circumstances changed? I said, no, they haven't. And then he said, does it make any difference? And I said, no, President, it doesn't make any difference. And he said, we would like you to serve as the mission president of the Canada-Toronto mission. So from April till the 1st of July, we did everything we could to dismantle, true to form, the Northwestern Mutual, chose a new general agent with the specific instructions to not purchase any of the facility, to purchase anything having to do with the agency that I had built. The desks, the chairs, the environment. The president of the company just absolutely was incensed that I would walk away for what he considered personal and irresponsible reasons. So on July 1, having been terminated with an empty office building, having poured myself into the industry, was told by the company that all my clients would be considered orphans and merely distributed to the field at large. And all records of my involvement would be eliminated. And at the time I didn't realize it, but my records were taken of anyone that I was working with. It's hard to believe he took that kind of position. Other companies had faced mission presidents. Massachusetts Mutual had, Connecticut Mutual, New York Life. I have no way of knowing why the Northwestern Mutual was so severe. On the one hand, I suppose I could consider it a compliment that at the highest level they thought enough of me to take the steps they were taking for me not to go. The financial officer of the company was a former Catholic priest, and he had left the priesthood. He had fallen in love with a member of the faculty at Marquette University, I think, and he and she had married and had been very close to me in terms of the implication of going on a mission. And he was instrumental because in a final conversation, I asked him the implications from his perspective of my leaving. And he volunteered that it would be, in his mind, the single biggest business mistake that he will have ever seen. But then he added, "But I don't think that makes any difference to you, does it, Alan?" I remember I broke out crying. I said, "No, Jim, it doesn't." And that was a final conversation that I had had with the leadership of the Northwestern Mutual. So Gay and Alan Brown, with their 5 children, climbed on the plane for Toronto, Canada in July of 1980. I've reviewed our business career began in 1960. Gay and I had we rented an apartment on Sunnyside Avenue, a basement apartment, and lived there for 2 years. My father was in the real estate business at that time and told me of a builder and a home that was available in the East Mill Creek area, Mountain View Drive. It was a very good time to buy a home. I had the opportunity, by virtue of financing then, of being a part of Veterans Administration loan rates. The first obstacle was that the home that we purchased did not have a plan. What the builder had done is built the same home in different locations. So there was an original plan, but no plan for the house that we purchased. A good friend, very talented, very simply beyond description in terms of kindness, goodness, and competence. Dick Smith. And I asked Dick if he could actually formulate plans for the house that was built. So he came out and he went backwards. Normally it's a plan, then a house. In this case, it was a house, then a plan. He saved us, and as a result, we were able to have a Veterans Administration loan. I'm inclined it's hard to think of what I paid, but it just seems like it was hardly $100 a month. The home was under $20,000, 17, 18, too long, incomprehensible as we relate to today's costs and challenges of purchasing a home. In 1962, we moved into Mountain View Drive. By then, Angelin was born, and it was there that we had all of our children. We indeed did love the area, the ward, the neighbors, the location was family orientated in every way. Church was close, schools were close, many families of similar circumstances as we were. Business, I had now climbed that first cliff of making almost no progress, and hard work, full commitment was translating into meaningful progress. By 1965, 66, 68, we were in a good position to buy a bigger home in another location that may carry more value, more, I say the word prestige. In actual fact, there are neighborhoods that carry overtones of success. I said to myself, I would rather, and I said to myself, but I certainly shared with Gay, and she agreed that let's play like we've moved into a bigger home with greater commitment, and use that commitment that we could be putting into a new home, let's put it into a capital account and save it and still enjoy where we are and play like we've moved from a cost standpoint. Friends, as they watched us in our super conservatism, we didn't have one piece of furniture for really a long time. I don't know, a year, maybe two. We immediately carpeted the house, so we had beds, but literally no furniture. Eventually, whenever that was, but it was a fair length of time, up to 2 years, we did decorate the home with furniture, had it designed by good friends who would continue to be good friends. Gail Badley, who worked with a best friend, Howard Clark, as an interior designer, and our little home, which was would be determined to be fairly little. Little is difficult to in actual fact visualize, but was extremely distinctive. It was warm, it was comfortable, it was us in terms of style, and in terms of being inviting. We loved that home, and one friend in particular who became an important part of our next home, Ellis Ivory, used to call our home the miracle of Mountain View Drive, rather than the miracle of 34th Street, I think was the Christmas movie, because we had children now. Tiffany had come, Gardner had come, Hildry had come, and Annabelle. We were or I say we, certainly Gay was actively involved. She was more inclined than I to be a part of identifiable neighborhoods. She loved the Cottonwood area, which was beautiful, and we had an opportunity to purchase an extremely beautiful home there with extensive land. From an investment standpoint alone, that would have made been a good decision. Neighborhood was very, very important to me. It was too gay, but I had felt so fortunate in growing up in an area where I could walk to everything: church, school, drugstores, movies. And that was a significant, a very, very significant part of my thinking. We looked at the Mount Olympus area, which was a beautiful area to live in. We looked at the St. Mary's area, which was a beautiful area to live in. One story that I've repeated often, won't elaborate, was we had the opportunity again by virtue of Ellis Ivory, to purchase a piece of ground that overlooked the entire valley. Early on, because of some Catholic friendships that I had, I'd become involved with the nuns who had a school, St. Mary's of the Wasatch, and had gained their confidence just by virtue of association. Not confidence for anything, just had their confidence as a sounding board. The Catholic Church, at that stage, left decision-making relative to business matters up to the area where their churches and their hospitals and their schools were. So whoever was the priest in charge, whatever the terminology. In any case, the St. Mary's of the Wasatch School closed down, and they had lots of property on the east side of Salt Lake, beautiful property. I have no idea how many acres, but many, many acres. They were not in a position to negotiate that, and they were really taken advantage of. So the developers of St. Mary, early developers, had acquired significant land at incredible, with incredibly low outlay. That whole area was a beautiful place to live, and one part became available really after most of the development that was right to the east of the entire area. It was like it was a plateau that I forget how many acres. It was finally designed to be sold to, with I think, a division of 4, maybe even as small as 3. Ellis came to me because I had introduced him to the sisters of the St. Mary's of the Wasatch and said, "Alan, I have this, in large part because you were involved, and therefore it's yours if you want it, and I'm ready to let you purchase the entire plateau or a part of it." I immediately picked up the one part. We decided to divide it in 3s, or the parcel in 3s. I made a decision, which was the one that was really the outcropping promontory of the plateau. Very proud. I've elaborated too much, but took my father up there the next day to show him where we were going to build our home. And my father at the time was using a cane, and with difficulty was able to climb up and stand on that promontory. I asked him what he thought as he looked out over the entire valley, literally being able to see west and north and south, as if you were flying in in an airplane. And he looked at me and he said, "Son, I've always been proud of you because you didn't think you were a big shot. When you played basketball and when you put effort into studies and when you graduated in your career, you haven't acted like or wanted to be a big shot. Now, if you build a home on this lot, on this property, everyone will point their fingers. That's where Alan Brown lives. And I've never thought you wanted to be a big shot, but that's what they'll do. They'll all know where Alan Brown lives." I went in the next morning to Alice and said, "That's not where we're going to build our house." That was the closest we came to purchasing a property until a neighbor of mine, Keith Eddington. I had been a home teacher to the family and had become personal and professional friend with Keith. Large family, and Keith was an artist, designer, and had purchased property on Brookburn Road, which was the road that was contiguous to the Mill Creek to Mill Creek stream. And Brookburn was just a beautiful side road, and off of Brookburn, the property dropped into a beautiful gully where the stream would pass through. And Keith had managed to purchase a piece of property. I cannot remember the number of acres, 4 or 5. In any case, it was a very large lot. And he wanted to build his home there, or intended to. And then he intended to have an art studio. And it was aesthetic and his dream. Keith knew that I was looking for property, and I had actually talked to him about his property, and others had tried to purchase it from Keith. One neighbor in particular who tried to negotiate with Keith, and he was adamant about not selling, and certainly he was not of the personality or of the attitude wanted wanted to bargain. But Keith was having real difficulty in his business and in his career, and it became necessary that he sell that piece of property. He came into my office one day knowing that I was interested, and he offered the property. He asked for a price, and he wanted it in cash, and he wanted it immediately. If I would accept his offer and his price with no discussion or negotiation, I could have the piece of property. I immediately said yes and completed the sale. And from Keith's standpoint, it was a very, very shattering moment, but from a practical standpoint, it was a necessity. So one could say win-win. Certainly from our standpoint, an incredible place to build a home, and from his standpoint, a way of dealing with practicalities, business, finance that often get in the way of dreams and hopes. So we made that decision just maybe 1971, maybe 72, in that area, and maybe 73. But in any case, immediately we began plans to build. My idea, and when I say my idea, we would discuss these things. I felt very strongly that homes should be structured with coordination. So rather than building the home and then decorating the home and landscaping the home, I felt the architect and the contractor and the interior decorator and the architect and the exterior landscaper, they should all meet in every meeting so that everything that we did was coordinated and took into account the end result that we were looking for, a home that was family, a home that was comfortable, that was decorated in such a way that people would leave saying, what an enjoyable evening. Not in any way, did you see or did you notice that couch or that particular piece of furniture. We just wanted them to feel welcome. And our entire effort in every step had to do with that objective. Our interior, our architect was Ron Mullen. Our builder was Ivory Construction. Our interior decorator, Gail Badley and Bill Fleming. And landscape architects, Mick Bishop, who was Bischoff, that was the brother of someone who worked with me in our agency. So as we met, and we met frequently with the progress of that home, the design, and everything we did was by virtue of agreement and discussion and primarily, in actual fact, how Gay felt. Gay was very sensitive to aesthetic, beautiful things. She herself, the way she dressed, her interpretation of beauty beyond the norm. And so the home, and really its decoration, she had precedence as it related to that, as well as the landscaping. We were all there. Certainly I was in the discussion, but I would have to give her credit for the fulfillment of the dream, if you will, that we were looking for. But the one part of the home that was mine, that I clearly had in mind I wanted was the study. The influence of my mission, of living in England, my love of library, my love of books. I wanted a library, a study. And I wanted it with books on shelves piled high. We designed it. It was 2 levels. We eventually purchased an elephant ladder to climb up and get those books. I had acquired books. I was always acquiring books. I loved the feeling. We had many fireplaces in that house. We had fireplaces. Then wood-burning fireplaces were not restricted. So we had fireplace in the living room. We had it in our master bedroom. We had it in our family room. And we had it in our study. That study was where I could read and think and produce within my mind what I wanted to do, what was important to do. I carried responsibilities, not only from a career standpoint, very actively involved in the church, had been involved in bishoprics and might have even been bishop at the time, primarily with young married students of the University of Utah, community activities, responsibilities relative to ballet, opera, school board. I had determined I had a responsibility to both the community as well as the church in terms of service and time and commitment. So the study. The house was completed. I arranged through a close friend, Bruce and Shirley Vanderwerf, to have a thank you dinner for everyone who had had anything to do with the building of that house. Those who had excavated, those who had done the woodwork, the walling, the flooring, every subcontractor completely across the board was invited to an evening where I could say thank you for our home that was consistent with everything we wanted. It was mine, M-I-N-E, beyond all comprehension. Our family immediately enjoyed it. I can honestly say I never looked upon that home, but what I felt, it was temporary. It was a blessing in every sense of the word, a blessing that I could not begin to comprehend. We, within, I think, 3 years, I'm not sure exactly when we went, 3 or 4 years, we were then called on a mission and left the home to be tended by Bruce and Shirley Vanderwerf. They were good friends. They had some needs at the time. seemed to make sense to have them be the caretakers of the home. And we made that decision rather than leasing it out. And then came home in 1983, so from 80 to 83, and then we were in that home from that point on till 1995. I would go up and down those stairs, and I would listen to the stream, watch the stream. We had a beautiful lawn area below, gazebo. One thing that we did, and I can't believe I'm currently forgetting the name, but when we moved in that home, we christened it, much like you do when you christen a ship that is going into the ocean. And so I bought champagne, and we created a rig with our family where we could offer a prayer of thanks and christen our home. And we had a name, and at this moment, with regret, really, can't think of the name of our home. It was beautiful. I had researched what to name it, consistent with the area, consistent with its history, and consistent with its beauty. In 1995, a gardener had found another place. The Gay was excited about another place. I supported another place. The children supported another place. And I left our home on Brookburn and left with me the reality of a dream that always I'll be grateful for, appreciative of, and feel fortunate and blessed that I was able to live on Brookburn Road for as long as we did. I'm grateful for every minute we spent on Brookburn Road. The cornerstone, the concept, the objective of our house had to do with the word cottage. I had seen the landscape of the British Isles of England and felt friendship, welcome, invitation from the cottages, the homes that were common, not the palaces, not the not anything palatial, not a fortress, a cottage. And from the beginning, as we talked, and Gay had then been to England. I don't know that she'd been to England. I do know that she felt very compatible with this approach that we were taking. I had a home teaching visitor, neighbor, many years my senior. And I told him that we were going to build a home, told him of the approach that we would take, and that I was looking for a name that would be consistent with the architectural, landscaping, the interior decorating. And he told me that in Old English, the best word that he knew of that described what I was sharing with him was the word Blythe, B-L-Y-T-H-E, Blythe. It's an Old English word. And Blythe, in the context of Old England, had to do with describing something kind, cheerful, pleasant, bright, happy, friendly, merciful. I looked at him and I knew that's what I wanted our house to be. Blythe Cottage. And I knew as we sat there and as I internalized this house, I said, this will be my approach. This will be the attitude of our home. And we will do everything that we can to be compatible with it, and we will christen our home and dedicate it to being Blythe Cottage. And we will express in prayer our gratitude for having this kind of home to be our home and to be a welcome to anyone and everyone who was a part of it. Arriving in Canada, as would easily be determined, the mission required everything that I had to give. It is a fascinating position to be a mission president. Basically, you don't know anyone, you don't know any place, and in actual fact, you don't know much of anything as it relates to the duties and the responsibilities and the calling. I had left behind a war zone in shambles and had turned over primarily monitoring of that destruction I'd left behind. A friend, a student, a part of the ward that Gay and I were bishop, charge of a young married. He had finished law school, and I had encouraged him to carry on and get a advanced master's degree in tax planning. Essentially saying to him when I left, do whatever you have to do, but I do not want to concentrate on making or make decisions and be in regard to, I don't want to be a house divided. I concluded that going on a mission for me was, insofar as possible, 100% mission. That isn't necessarily the direction that is given. That isn't the approach that many take. But I did. I just did not want to include a portion of my brain or my emotions in another arena. There was a price to be paid for that detached way of approaching things. There were emergencies that could not be circumvented. Close at hand, relative to that part of me that I had chosen to ignore, was a friend, Nate Wade. We had known each other since childhood. He was closely associated with Elder Russell Ballard, who was a general authority. I don't know what his position, whether he was on the missionary committee or not, but nevertheless was very deeply involved in church missionary activity and in the leadership of missions, and was aware, by virtue of my association with him prior to our mission, of some of the challenges that I was facing. Without belaboring that time frame, I can summarize it by saying our time in Canada was like going through an estate settlement alive. Basically, any asset that we had, real estate, building, anything of a financial nature was at risk and pretty well obliterated. We ended up, after 3 years, with our home on Brookburn. And that was because I had promised within myself that I would not have a big home or a nice home that carried any debt. And by virtue of having made that decision, the home was secure and was without any lien or obligation. What to do after 3 years? My landing was not smooth. It was a crash landing. By virtue of the next step to begin again a career, good associations, confidence in people, and confidence in me. It wasn't so much that I didn't have alternatives. The greatest loss that I can reference that I found myself contending with was the loss of me. Alan Brown wasn't the Alan Brown that had started the first time, had the attitude of my first endeavors, having the, I say determination, I had changed. It wasn't that religion all of a sudden took upon itself a new meaning. It was emotional, psychological, very complicated. So opportunities just didn't carry with it the carbonation, the fizz, the pizzazz. Had a chance to go with wonderful friend, business associate, Ellis Ivory, in the world of banking, being a trustee. Ongoing calls and opportunities, none of which resonated. Insurance companies had been very complimentary. One in particular that I had great respect for was with the Guardian Life Insurance Company, and they made special effort to provide avenues within their system that could translate into real opportunity, and decided to go with them as it related to wanting to continue in planning and working with people in their personal lives and working with the individuals in their business planning. Attendant to that was a financial planning organization by another close friend, Gary Sheets. The organization was called Certified Financial, CFS, Certified Financial, I forget it, but CFS. In any case, the offer came from Gary, be a part of our executive team, office in our building, in our infrastructure. We'll hire a secretary, provide the space, even provide a car. The offer was without limits in terms of encouragement to come, and that's where I did provide an office and in effect started to be an executive with CFS, as well as to structure my own road avenue to the mountain that I had established to climb. Felt as though there was a relationship between CFS and Guardian, which proved not to be consistent with the organization that Gary had created. From the beginning, I could see that who they were, he and his other executive members, who I was. We did march to a different drummer. This was during a time when tax-sheltered investments were tremendously advantageous in the short run. It remained to be seen whether in the long run, which proved to be disastrous in the long run, but in the short run, tremendous amount of money was being made by pushing tax-sheltered real estate and extraneous marketing, extraneous economic avenues, wind energy, sun energy, almost limitless ways, growing corn for gas. All of those things were in their infancy and attracting many investors. What can be said at this point is that that first year, second year was truly convoluted. I could see very soon that what Gary Sheets and his organization, what they were pursuing, appeared to be on a collision course with disaster that proved to be true. I removed myself from executive activities within not many months, maybe a year, forming my own organization again with people I had respect in, former partner or former Steve Barlow, who I had encouraged to be a part of the planning world, a couple of my missionaries that had tremendous ability, knew that they would make their mark in terms of achievement. And they, while they were in school, were a part of that organization. And I'm swinging hard and hitting the ball on occasions, in actual fact, relative to the community or the business world. I was doing good again. From my viewpoint, I was feeling more confused than productive, and knew that the path had to be a far more solid path than I was currently following. Then I decided to form a partnership with two individuals that I had high respect for, and felt that Dan Marriott, who had been in the financial world prior to spending 6 years as a United States congressman, and Steve Barlow, who I had encouraged to come into the business, who had been a part of the part of the young married wards that I had been associated with. And we formed a partnership, Dan Marriott and Steve Barlow and Alan Brown. Again, I worked very hard to make that happen. It turned out that Dan had no respect for Steve, and thus was constantly complaining and at odds. Steve had equal animosity for Dan. And each was producing, but remarkably, and I look back on it, it was not being, the production was not being entered into the partnership, except mine. Just an admission that it did not occur to me that the organization was being supported financially by my production, because in the meantime I was somewhat on fire again, would become a leader in the Guardian system, leading all their agents in the West or being close to the leader. That partnership was destined, by virtue of personality challenges and real animosity, to failure. Steve left with first, and then Dan and I determined to break up the partnership entirely. And Former Northwestern Mutual colleagues, associations, one in particular, Peter Hurst, who was then the president of the General Agents Association for the Northwestern Mutual. Very outstanding, as was most of the leaders in the Northwestern Mutual. It is remarkable how that company was recognized by men of academic achievement with any number of opportunities. Peter had a graduate degree from Harvard University. Made a big fuss with me and the company to offer a contract with the Northwestern Mutual. The agreement with Northwestern Mutual was interesting. I would come on as a new agent, but with none of the incentive or allowances of being a new agent. I would be considered an old agent merely with the contract with Northwestern Mutual. Nor was it within the agreement to chase down policyholders that had been my policyholders, but they had all been distributed and assigned to other Northwestern Mutual agents. So even though a contract was offered, it was empty of any incentive. But having ended the partnership with Dan and Steve, and again receiving the emotional and the economic attraction of Northwestern Mutual, I came back to the Northwestern Mutual agency, which had subsequently changed general agent from the one that assumed the agency when we left for Canada. He was told to take a very, very hard position, which I've outlined he did, relative to any furniture or any support for what I had done. He had left as general agent, and the new general agent was encouraging and very excited and very supportive of my, again, officing with the Northwestern Mutual, which would be now 8 years after my termination and 5 years after our return. This would be in the year 1988. I remember distinctly standing in my new office. I did not have any kind of an association. Then the agency had changed. My policyholders had all been reassigned to random agents in the agency. No files, no chance really to reconnect then my memory. It felt very vacant, and I admit to shedding a few tears, maybe a lot of tears. Gardner was just returning from his mission that year, and I was anxious to take him to the annual meeting. The annual meeting with the Northwestern Mutual had been an inspiration to me. It had formulated goals, a career path that included being very good at what I did. Former employees of the agency, they wanted to help me find an assistant, recognizing that even though I was empty in many ways, I really couldn't function without someone competent who understood the tremendous changes in equipment, to understand how to generate proposals. We went to Milwaukee, Gardner and I, and it was very foreign. I had lost my identity. No ribbons, no recognitions, I say with a smile. Excited for Gardner to attend, but truly I was on the outside looking at it, even more than I had felt my first annual meeting when I was just beginning my career. The experience, I would just have to say was, I'd like to even use the word sorrowful, but meaningful. We came back to my office, and the staff had recommended Gina. Her last name is hard to pronounce. Gina had been a part of the Northwestern Mutual, initially wanting to be an agent, but she found it difficult to be in the sales arena. And so it seemed like a good fit. Gina had familiarity with product and familiarity with worksheets and the kinds of things that I needed. And I, with Gina, I swung hard at the ball, but nothing was the same. I wasn't the same. The company was not the same. The agency was not the same. I put myself in a zone of work. Work meant refinding Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company, refinding NML's market, refinding a place for me to run and achieve, as always had been my privilege and challenge since entering the business. I really hate to include that it was a dark time. I had long ago determined that most realities and how you deal with those realities are a choice. So if it's dark, I was making it dark. If it was sad, yes, it could be sad, but attitude generated altitude. We actually had a theme. So that time frame was distant to Alan Brown. Gina, an incredible support, anxious to do anything and everything she could. She had not so long ago married an outstanding engineer who had been given a chance to work in Salt Lake City. And so for the next years, without making an effort to isolate much that happened during that period of time, Gardner finished his schooling, having worked part-time in numerous jobs, determined that he wanted to go with the Northwestern Mutual. He had become close friends with my friends that I had stayed close to that came out every year to dirt bike. They were leaders in every sense of the word. They were leaders in their community. They were leaders in the business, and nationally renowned leaders. That exposure had impressed Gardner. My state of mind was such that I didn't know whether to encourage him or not. That's how I had shifted. But Gardner decided to join. We started by thinking that a good way for he and other young agents to begin their career was to serve as marketing finders for me. So they would find or introduce me to any number of associations, and we'd work together. They would find, and I would meet with them and review their circumstances and make recommendations if applicable. The spark, the light, the attitude again meant that Gardner was learning the business. I did have many meetings by virtue of referrals from younger agents. But that time frame from 1988, picking up Gardner along the way, and arriving to a new century, the year 2000, I reflect upon and can't find much in terms of achievement, accomplishment. I was still good. I had dedicated myself to knowing the product, to knowing companies, to knowing what was applicable to people's circumstances, still had industry reputation and industry understanding. I knew the product from an actuarial standpoint, and when counsel was given, when product was recommended, I have nothing to be anything but proud of. But insofar as having a vision, having goals, looking for the stars, climbing for the sky, all of those things that I had given speeches in regard to, had interviews with so many in reference, made the decision that in that year, the agency had changed locations. I was in an adjoining office to Gardner. And as it related to my business career, I could not re-find it or re-find me, not because I wasn't doing good or well, relatively compared to those who were agents in our industry, I was still noteworthy. But I knew I wasn't. Maybe that's emotional sickness. I would have to admit that the balance that people enjoy when they're adults and mature between what's possible and maturity and approaching it, I just walked in one day to Gardner and said, I'm through. Time should have been taken for that transition. I had files again, been involved for over a decade. I had built meaningful associations, many new clients. Sanity, good business, objective thinking would have meant that he and I would sit down and go through those files to make sure that the transition this time, in contrast to last time, the transition was abrupt. It was truly jumping off a cliff. This time, the transition didn't need to be that abrupt, didn't need to be jumping off a cliff. But Gardner was now building his reputation. He had his clients. He felt that it was a better use of time to continue the path that he was on rather than taking the kinds of hours and days that it would have taken to have gone through the path that I was on. Hard to piece together exactly why we didn't. But fundamentally, one day I was in the office, and the next day I wasn't. So the career path that had begun in 1960, based upon pride and motivation that had come from going to graduate school, rewards, recognition, association, confidence by the community in so many ways. How I would like somehow to hire a sign in the sky and say, thank you, thank you. You made my business career rewarding, stimulating, filled with all of the good things in life. It all came about because of confidence and association and counsel that I felt competent in providing, and financial reward that came by virtue of being a part of the industry that I was a part of. Not much more to say about my career, so we'll let that be the end of my business chapter.